Hit the lights!
You've discovered the Halfwatt podcast. We want to educate and entertain by tapping into the most trusted source of new technology, the ones installing and innovating it. You, the tradespeople that build from the ground up. Join us as we talk with industry leaders, veteran contractors, and even some young blood.
Welcome aboard. This is Mike Brooks, your host, and today we're interviewing Gary Youngberg. Welcome aboard, Gary.
Thank you, Mike.
So Gary hails from Performance Systems. He's an ISET Level 4. He's an EST3 guru, and in all actuality, he's what we call a systems integrator. And I am super excited that you're here, Gary. And I would like you to give me some of your history, because I know you've only been in fire a couple of years.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your history and in which century you started with fire alarm work.
So technically, yes, last century, 77. That's
was that 18?
That's 19.
It was 1977. Okay.
I basically I finished high school in Libby, Montana, real quick, and
that's not a real place.
It is. It's
okay.
Beautiful. It's God's country. But you could either pull green chain or work in the vermiculite mines, zonalite, W.R. Grace.
Really?
Yeah, that was the two things to do unless you owned a business. And I worked for a Chevy dealer. I was supposed to become a mechanic. They were going to send me to Tiger, to the GM school when it was here. And the service...
the one that's off in 99.
That used to be off in 99, yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, out of 99, yeah.
So I was going to come there. Well, the service manager got transferred and went to Alaska, and then the owners of the company just wanted me to clean detail cars, do oil changes. I knew I could do more than that, so
you gotta hope.
My dad got me started at ADT in San Jose, 1977. I was a grunt.
In San Jose, huh?
No
kidding.
Yeah, I went to the big city. It was a shock, culture shock for me. Never been there.
So from Libby, Montana to San Jose, California.
Mm-hmm. Correct. It was not fun. First thing I did was build shelves, material handling, and then they sent me to fire school in San Francisco for ADT. We had this old guy there, had one eye, kind of went off the far side. He was from England, talked kind of funny, and he taught fire alarm class. And I'm not talking like fire alarm now like you and I teach. I'm talking drilling risers, tapping PIVs, grinding real installation, grinding the little dip in an OS&Y. So
I want everybody to notice that what Gary's talking about are sprinkler
yes.
installations, and that is a big bugaboo of mine, is to get LEAs in Oregon to start being unafraid of water. So go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. No, that's a good catch. And so that's what we learned how to do. This guy had a big 24-inch brass fire bell. And you never knew what eye he was looking at you with, but after lunch, and he warned you, he said, after lunch, you guys try and fall asleep on me. He'd mash the button, and man, that bell just waked the living dead. And I finally got, like the third day, I could tell that look in one of the eyes that he was going to mash the button. You kind of look around, somebody start nodding off, they hit the button. But, we did everything. Back then, not the ADT of today, but back then, ADT was a lot like integrators like PSI, some of the other manufacturers here, won't name the competition, of course. But they did parts and smarts. The electricians would pull all the wire, the ADT techs would come in, and they'd commission the system. Of course, we're talking 4 wires back then, McCullough circuits, break the teeth off on the code wheels to actually address the place.
Wow. Yeah. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah.
Yeah, you broke the teeth off, and you had to break off you had to count like for 3, 1, 2. You'd count threes, break a tooth off, count 1, break a tooth off, count 2, and then break the rest off.
So I show my students the pull stations. I got one Gamewell pull station. That's my personal one I own that you pull down, and it's got the little wheel in it still.
Okay, so
but that's not the McCullough loop, but that's just the pull station coded.
But it hooked to a McCullough loop probably.
It probably did.
So
it's older than me.
Fun fact: I've actually installed a Gamewell pull box.
No kidding.
It was in Watsonville, California, circa 1978 or 79. You had to order it from Warren Oliver. They were $1,900 back then.
Wow.
And it took 6.5 to 8 weeks to get because they're all custom built. So Watsonville had auxiliary service where the fire station actually ran the wires all throughout Watsonville and would drop them down the pole where you had to mount the box. And then you would hook your fire alarm system in the building up to that box on the pole. I did one of those in my lifetime.
Kidding.
Yeah.
So you've actually installed one of these. Here I am telling all my students I was only on the East Coast, and then come to find out I'm just a big fat liar.
You just didn't know what you didn't know.
Well, and I do point out that when you're driving in Portland and you go by the Lloyd Center, you go across 21st Street, the bridge that goes across the band field. Right when it comes to the south side, it splits.
That's the retransmission.
That's the retransmission site. It says fire alarm telegraph.
Yep.
Yeah.
I remember seeing it when I first moved up here. So
I didn't work on that though.
Yeah. So anyway, I worked on places like Peter Paul. They make the candy in Salinas. So everything was McCullough when I started. Coated transmitters. I actually bought a boat, rowboat, okay, but a boat on the overtime from going out and rewinding water flow transmitters.
No kidding.
Yeah, because it was weird in San Jose. The maintenance department didn't want to work overtime. I was young, hungry, installations, wanted to learn. Let's go out. You get 4 hours to drive out, hit a transmitter with a skate key. It's basically a squared off key that you open the box, you turn in, you wind the transmitter, and boom, it's reset. And you're good to go. And you get 4 hours minimum.
So for everybody who doesn't follow what we're talking about, there's a motor that you have to has a spring in it, and you rewind it, and it has to do a minimum of 3 rounds. And so once that's tripped, you have to have a special key to open it up to then rewind the spring. Yeah.
And that way it's armed for when the water flows. It was a mechanical device. Water would flow. The little catch, kind of like a pawl, would go out of the way after the timer ran out. Your delay on the it's called a retard, not disparaging, just that's what it's called, retard. And the vane would move from water, and it would disconnect, and then there was a pneumatic chamber in there that wouldn't allow the other piece to disengage until a certain amount of time, which was typically anywhere from 30 to 90 seconds, whatever. And that would save from having to go rewind that transmitter all the time.
So those ADT water flow switches and the plunger style tampers are still in service. I've worked on them, and they look like they're armored. I mean, they really look like an armored box. Especially the water flow switches.
The old ADT equipment, when ADT made it, and I'm not going to disparage them, but they just changed when they sold out and got bought out. But the old place, my dad worked for them for many years, and that's how I got it. That stuff was almost bulletproof.
Yeah, it really was.
In fact, as you recall, when I joined PSI, they sent me right out to a place in Milwaukee that I had serviced when I worked for ADT, and those plunger switches are still there, and I had changed a couple out.
Yep, I remember that exact place.
And I spent literally 24 hours in a row troubleshooting that because it's all black wire.
Yep.
Goes around the whole building, and it's supposed to go clockwise according to ADT standard back then, but somebody had wired it counterclockwise.
I did not know that. It's supposed to go clockwise?
So when I'm out there troubleshooting, I'm going clockwise from the demarc, and it was the second to the last place. Had I gone counterclockwise, it'd been the second thing I found.
The second thing you did. Yeah, if you thought backwards. Well, you're in Portland. I don't know what you're thinking. Well, it was Milwaukee.
Yeah, it was Milwaukee. Yeah. So, but
go up.
Yeah. So, I kind of jumped around, but, I started out in the Bay Area. I got the trade. I've worked at places like Lockheed, where you can't even go to the restroom alone. All kinds of neat things. And then
it's that way at Facebook too, so don't feel bad.
Yeah.
I worked there for 3.5 years on their equipment. I was escorted every single time I went anywhere except in the visitors area.
Yeah, I finally
Not in the restroom, for those of you who are counting, just to the restroom.
No, when you work at Lockheed,
they take you in the restroom.
If you do not have a secret clearance or cleared, you leave if you have to go, number 2, that you leave the door open and they stand there.
You know that your COO's wife works there. She works in the Skunk Works there.
Oh, wow.
So David's wife actually works in Sunnyvale. She actually works for Lockheed. And is a Skunk Works engineer. Yeah.
Oh,
it's
wow.
pretty good. Yeah, he doesn't know what she does.
That same thing I'm doing. My son got transferred to Kirtland in Albuquerque, and all he can tell me is he works for the Air Force now.
Yeah, I sweep runways. That's all you can say.
And so it's like, okay. When my wife was alive, she asked, often she'd try and circle around it. Honey, quit asking him the question. He works for the Air Force. Yep. Stop it. He can't talk to you. but I digress. So so anyway, I worked in California from 77 to 85.
Okay.
I excelled at things. ADT, I got it come out with a new line that was electronic addressable, and I just took to it. And the next thing you know, I was a regional training manager at 26 years old.
Wow.
So I went from, grunt to tech to lead tech. My first big job was an old Edwards 5307 at IBM. They called it Silver City. It was in South San Jose. It was beautiful. It was something like you would see on a sci-fi movie, all silver buildings.
No kidding.
It was aluminum clad. And they had this gigantic courtyard, and underneath that was the data center.
Oh, wow.
And I had to run smoke detectors, all kinds of stuff there, conduit. I must have run, I think the first batch of conduit we bought was 15,000 feet. And I had never bent conduit in my life.
I bet you did after that.
I know how to bend conduit now after that. And they had the old key punch machines.
Oh, yeah. No, I've seen
and then
those.
they had the tape drives. And then they had the new section where they had the 12-inch platters, stack of 9 or 10 of them would go in the big machine when they first started getting digital. But the thing about that is when I was in that facility, it was all secret. You had to get special clearance. When you lift the ceiling tile up, those beams, those I-beams were literally 5 or 6 feet thick because the courtyard had trees and grass and dirt.
Wow.
If you didn't know, you couldn't tell there was anything underneath.
Huh.
And that's the one thing in this job over these couple of years I've been doing it, is the neat stuff I've been able to see.
Yeah.
Put a sound system, speakers, in at Paul Masson Winery in Soledad. Actually had somebody steal my wire. We got pulled off, and we get back
at the winery.
At the winery, somebody stole the wire.
$500 bottle of wine. How much take your spool?
Well, no, these were the big redwood vats, the humongous redwood vats.
Those are hard to get in your car.
Yeah, they're really tough, and if you're not paying attention, you never want to stick your head in one of those things when they're cleaning it out, because they use some pretty caustic stuff, and
caustic soda. And
nowadays they would probably not even let you get there. And some of the things installing obviously were way safer today than when I was doing this.
Yeah.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, and I've only been in the trade probably half as long as you have, and it's definitely been an improvement.
Yeah.
A vast improvement.
I won't talk about some of the things I've done on the job that I would never do today. I just count myself lucky.
Me too. It's like vault entry.
Yes, we talked about that today.
When I first was doing the thing, it was like I was in a vault. I'm thinking, I was 22 feet in, and I'm like, this is dumb. This is, and of course it was in Washington at the time, and I was like, what am I doing in here? Like when I was in the Navy, I knew gas free. I would never go into a void that wasn't gas free by a tech. So and here I am, and I came out of it, and I went, I'm not going to do this anymore. And so the other guy went in, and I'm like, well, okay, if I didn't want to go in, you shouldn't go in either. And then I went back to the office, and I said, this is not right. We should get some sort of sniffing equipment. And they had just sold 2 scuba pieces of, not the kind you dive with, the other kind. And he goes, well, put one of these in your van and wear that. Right. And I looked at it, and I'd worn OBAs in the military, but not this. This was the tank like the firemen wear. Right. I'm like, I could really hurt myself with this. No. Yeah. And so I just stopped going in, and I was seriously like tripping the tampers from outside the vault just because I thought, well, this is ludicrous. And then when I subsequently, went to work for OHSU, and because I was working at one company, went to OHSU and then left. And then when I went to the United Fire after OHSU, that's where they taught me how to do backflows. And you were like, this is your, we had Crocon at the time, this is your gas-free meter, and you do not do anything without it. And sure enough, man, I hit a bad vault. I hit a bad vault with hydrogen sulfide. No, I think it was high.
I can't count how lucky I am. You know how many vaults I was in San Jose, the Bay Area, grinding those stems, the OS and Y, to mount the devices. I mean, we didn't think about it. It just got in. I mean, it was like unbelievable. Some of the risks, but one of my old bosses told me, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, you don't.
Good grief.
Yeah. So after ADT, so you're a regional manager at ADT, or I'm sorry, regional trainer at ADT. Then,
So what happened was a guy I'd worked with ADT had moved to Portland, and he was a service manager here, running the service department. And I'd just gotten married, and we were looking around, and inflation was, back in those days, it was like 18 or 19%. And houses were already astronomical back then in the Bay Area. And I was just looking at it, I'm like, I can never afford to buy a house, even if my wife at the time worked. We were never going to buy a house. And so I started looking to transfer. And of course, they wanted to send me straight to Seattle, which is like out of the pan into the fire.
Yeah, really.
Overcrowding, high price, lots of traffic, horrible.
And rain.
And no, I like the rain. I don't do hot. I had a heat stroke at 4 years old, so I just don't do hot.
So, yeah.
I can't deal with hot. So there was Portland, and there was my old guy I had worked with, Ron. So I called him. They didn't have anything, and so we kept working, and finally they made a spot. I could come be a repairman. I was like, well, I can install. I can teach them to install. I did repairs on call when I was in San Jose, on it. And so I came up and was starting in 85. I moved here in 85. Pardon me. And I was at the repair department at the Portland ADT when it was on Hancock before they moved everything. And then went to some more training, and I became the central station tech. So I maintained the computer, all the batteries, the power supplies, the Lamarches.
So you did all the UL testing, the twice a year UL testing, and the compliance.
And I had to take and draw the acid out of those 2,000 amp hour batteries, and it has to be 1/3 down from the top, so you get a good sample of the acid with your hydrometer, and then you have to log it.
No kidding, I did not know that.
Yeah.
All I know about central stations was from what Dimitri Bajor taught me at CSM.
Yeah.
And that was brief, but he was like my go-to guy. And then one of his technicians that works for him when I was working at PSI, I would call him all the time, and he would help me kind of get my head wrapped around all their stuff. And man, those guys you could eat off the floor.
Yeah.
In
well,
CSM.
ours wasn't that way. I had to get it that way.
You didn't eat off the floor at your place?
No. But we also had the computer, and the first computer I worked on was called an Intel 330, had an 8.5-inch floppy.
Wow.
And you had to boot it twice to get it to start because
8.5-inch
floppy drive.
Man.
That's the original. It was. But fun fact, part of why I was the central station tech here in Portland is because I helped when they expanded the one in San Jose. So I had got central station knowledge because it all made sense to me, and I was always eager to learn. And fun fact about a central station I worked at once, this guy came over from the East Coast, and you're never supposed to have two doors open on a central station, ever.
I did not know that.
No, that's why they have the man trap or the sally port.
Okay.
And so you open one door, close it, then the other one can be opened. And typically most central stations don't have keys because there's always supposed to be someone in there.
That makes sense.
Well, this one happened to have a storage room off the back, and some guy turned into his office, and then UL guy came in the back door.
Oh, no.
On UL inspection, and this guy was kind of arrogant. He's from the back. He's had his feet propped up on the table, and UL guy goes, well, I just walked right in here, and I could do this or do that, whatever, and, you're going to fail. And this guy reaches in his drawer, grabs a 6-inch bull barrel 357 Magnum, holds it up, and he says, "No, you won't. I'll blow your blankety blank brains out." And he passed.
Oh, I bet.
He passed. But, I was like, wow. And then, of course, corporate sent down the edict that he shouldn't do that anymore. But that was back in, probably the 80s, early 80s.
Did you guys have a lot of stew accounts back then?
Oh, the stews.
So for those of you who don't know what a stew is,
a
stew
you're killing me.
It's a subscriber terminal unit. It's like
scam alert.
Yeah, isn't that like a dry line that just has a modem on it that just always talks to
how
did that work?
So the beauty of stews, and basically they turned into DSL.
Oh, okay. So that's
they sold off the stew technology to DSL. So what happened is, as you remember, everything was a quote dialer, a digital alarm communicator transmitter, DAC, and lots and lots of homes were run by DACs. Okay. Well, eventually the bad guys figured out we cut the phone line, boom, and and it was weird because some of the people live in the higher end districts would buy the cheapest alarm system, and then, it'd get cut, and you go out to service tech, find out why it failed, and they're screaming and yelling at you because, so the phone company developed the STU, or the scan alert technology, and it's superimposed over the phone line.
Okay.
It's not, we didn't have cell phones back then. We had phone lines, hard copper. And so, and it was always polling. So then you would know if somebody clipped a line. And it was funny because people
super fast. I know
it was
that.
very
I know
fast.
every time I worked on one, it was like about the time I touched it, they already knew it.
They already knew.
Yeah.
So it was funny how the griping from the customer would go from, phone lines getting taken away when I'm trying to talk to my daughter, whatever. So then that quit happening, but it would make a high-pitched squeal sometimes when it was sending the response. And they would complain and whine and snivel about that thing. It's like, we can go back to the way it was then if you'd like, and it'll take your phone line away for 5 minutes. I wasn't real popular because I call things like they are, and
that's funny though.
I've learned to, even as I speak here, I'm learning to tailor how I respond. Or even some of these stories I've had to obviously clean up for here.
It's what makes you unique and me unique in the industry, and that we are old timers, really.
Yeah.
We're the old timers. We looked at all the guys, because all the guys I knew from Simplex, like Marty Middaugh and
I remember that name.
And all these guys that are, Rich, and all those guys, Rich Humbert, and they're all gone, retired, dead, what have you. And it's like, and that's it. You're like, there was there were guys at Simplex I met, Bob Brown would be a good example, who were just phenomenal technicians. Yeah. Stan Ferguson, I'm thinking of, they're all popping in my head right now. And their personalities and what you picked up from them, you carried that in. And it's part of the culture that we've grown accustomed to. It's what we are.
I had a supervisor, his name was Doc. He may still be alive, but he'd be very old. And he would just grunt in the morning. And you'd come in and say, "Good morning. What's good about it?" So I figured it out. I didn't ever say good morning. I'd either say morning or something. And one time I came in, I go, "Morning, Doc." And then we had it out. I screamed and yelled at him that day. I said, "Look, you don't have to say good, whatever. But if I come in looking for work and you're my supervisor, you owe me a dispatch, or tell me what I'm going to do.
Sure.
I don't care what kind of night you had or whatever. I had a bad one myself." And it was funny. After I did that to him, then he was just one of them ones you had to just get in his face sometimes.
Yeah.
Not so much of this, call HR and give the code word or whatever. It was just like, hey, knock it off. I'm a human being too.
I've run into those before because of some of the grouchier people, and if you snap at them, then they're like best of buds. Like, okay,
exactly.
But so you worked in a central station.
Well, that was another job. My full job was doing repairs.
You did that on top of it.
That was on top of it.
Wow.
So I've always done a lot of things. I try to get all the training I can, get us, even to this day, do the math. August 27, 1977 was my first day starting this industry. And so, when that comes up here in 2022, you run the math. It's been a long doggone time.
Yeah.
But it's still, after all these years, it's still exciting. I'm still learning new things. As I get older, I don't retain it as much as I used to. Automatically have to write things down, which is very annoying because I used to just memorize stuff by accident. Now I have to actually write it down. And then some of the stuff I've been through this last year, my mind's kind of...
Oh, yeah, your mind will be,
so
I'm mush after that.
I'm making adjustments.
Excuse me, yeah.
Yeah, I'm making adjustments.
Yeah, you're doing... So once you did the ADT up here and then worked at a central station, and it was an ADT central station.
It was an ADT-owned central station. We had 135 of them. We had McCullough Circuit. So one of my projects to consolidate central stations is I had to convert all the systems that were using copper phone lines to some other means of transmission. Either we had what was called direct wire, which had to go away because it was a copper wire from the central station out to the device and then back. It could go about 30 miles was the limit because it's 26 gauge. But they were able to push 130 volts, about 30 miles out and back. And then we had what's now like IP, but it was called open window bridge AC transmission. So it was an FSK type signal. and everybody was sitting on this bridge, and every panel could hear every other panel talking, but they only responded when talked to.
It was like really early networking.
Yeah,
really.
It's really early networking. Yeah. It was more affordable and faster because everybody heard everybody. The problem was if somebody talked out of turn, the whole thing would drop. So you'd lose 63 subscribers, boom. We had that in the Bay Area. What they had here was called Morse, closed window bridge. So that was the benefit there is if somebody went offline, don't care, you can turn them off. The problem is it's slow because the poller would have to ask the terminal, hey, I want to talk to you, open the door. And then the terminal.
So it's more of a token ring type system.
Yeah, so then it opened the door, and then it'd interrogate it, and then it'd talk back, and then it'd have to tell it, close the door, we're done. Well, that added time. But if one went bad, you could just quit talking to them. The open window bridge was like within like a second. It pulled 3 times a second.
Wow.
So, and I set those up, and you had 2 different frequencies, bands, transmit and receive, and the phone company, for love or money, could never get it right. They'd either have the filters in for the same, like it transmit at 1075 to 1375 and respond from 2025 to 2225. Holy, where'd that come from?
Yeah, that's pretty damn
Where did
good
that come
for a
from?
guy who hasn't touched it in that many years, since 86.
Yeah, all that had to go away because it relied on copper, and now you see where we're at with wireless. And so that was my project. And that one building we talked about was one of the ones I had to get off of McCullough lines onto any other transmission. So we did a lot of DACs because back then that was the thing to go to.
And they moved to that because Honeywell was using those little tiny orange. I don't know what they were. They were super fast. Yeah. But when I first got in the industry, 2000 and like Simplex 2001s was a really common fire panel, and the dialer in it was this little orange thing that said Honeywell. Yeah. And I don't know what it did because I was new to the industry, but I knew that I called Honeywell so often to put stuff in tests. They were in Minnesota, that I knew all 5 of the operators, and one of them knew me well enough that when she came out to Portland, she was going to come visit me, and I had to explain that to my ex. I'm like, okay, so this person's like going to show up in there, and I didn't really know exactly who she was, but it was so we became close enough that I didn't need any passcodes. So I would call up and say, hi, it's Mike. Okay, what do you want in test? This one, and this is before UL said, thou shalt you shall put passcodes on everything. And, for that reason, because people like me would, any idiot could call up and put stuff in tests. So, but anyway,
I remember those days.
So what did you do after the Central Station gig?
So I became what was called a system service tech. Which is like a specialized technician. It's not just a regular installer repair person. It's just like you're the one. It's like a local, when your techs can't get anything figured out, you're the go-to guy.
Got it.
So I'd gone to school. We had a computer system out at, it's called Cotter & Company on 181st and Gleason, or 181st. It's out there in Gresham. And it was a Data General. Tiny. It was a huge box because ADT liked their big box, tiny little computer. No memory at all. Literally, you had 3 steps to start it up when it crashed. You had to enter the start and stop addresses of every code, and it was in octal, so it's 0s and 7s. And that code was like 2 pages long. And I lived about 40 miles from there. And I had typed that code in so many times that they would call. I'd call the local tech here in town. The guy's name was Dave. He'd drive out there, call me on the phone, and at 2 in the morning, I'd just bark out those codes. It says 2 pages of start and stop addresses for the executive program. God. So you'd load that. Then you had to load the operating program. And then when that was done, if everything was fine, you could load the database. The problem was it was a battery-powered tape drive. You had one shot, and then you had to wait 19 hours for the tape drive to recharge. Finally got the boss to buy a AC one because you could not leave the charger plugged in, charging the battery, trying to run the tape drive because it was too noisy and would corrupt everything. So remember the movie War Games with that kid?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
That came out about the time I took care of this machine. The number one thing this machine would do, it's called a Central Scan 100. The number one thing it would do if anything went sideways was crash. And I'm like watching war games going, this is stupid. The thing will crash. You can't type that in twice. It'll crash. And I don't know if it's a safety thing, but that's how that sensor scan was. Anything out of line, its default was crash, and you got to reload the program. I bought a boat up here with that. Another rowboat, but that's fine. So yeah, so I did that. So when I got done with ADT, it was about 93. One of the guys I worked with, Scott, had gone to work for a little company called ESL, Central ESL. And Central was a local company that was started up by, I can't remember the names. But anyway, they sold alarm switches, and then they bought out ESL, which was a smoke detector manufacturer and panel manufacturer. And asked me if I wanted to do tech support. Well, it'd be different, and it was a heck of a pay increase. And all I had to do is answer the phone.
Yeah.
14,000 calls a year.
Oh, and ESL was some of the ESL equipment was really dynamite.
Some of it was.
Quite a bit. Some of it was not.
I can tell a true story about that. It's not out of school. So I took the job, and as things would all work out, the first wife, we'd had 3 kids, and she decided she was done with kids, even though she had to have them. And next thing I know, I'm a single dad of 3 children. Oh. 6, 5, and 3. But I had this job that I knew what time I'd start, and I knew what time I'd be home. And it did well. So I was salaried at that job. And so we were set to get a bonus one year. It was 2 digits. I mean, percent-wise. It was going to be 5 digits in my bank account, which I thought was just, really, really good.
Yeah, that's in the early 90s, yeah.
Yeah, it was really good. It was like 94, 95, whatever year it was. They just come out with this brand new detector. It was really, really cool. Had replaceable optics to change the sensitivity back to factory, and it was just going like gangbusters. We had a recall December 18th or 22nd. I don't know, it was either just so close to the close of business. We were all on track for this humongous. Of course, it didn't happen because the recall happened, and forget it. So
that wasn't on the 449 product.
Yeah, it was the 400.
Oh, that was the 400, the 400, the 449 series?
429, 449s, yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
So we had that big recall,
wow.
and we were trying to find a way to just bump it out to January 1 or whatever, and of course they couldn't because, it's the wrong thing to do, and we worked for a really good company then. So what happened was, all said and done, nobody got the bonus. Everybody was crying. I was too, because it's like, wow, first time I'm good for a bonus, but here it is, no bonus. The particular VP at that particular time lobbied with the executive board and got us all a week's pay.
Nice.
Now, understand, by plan, we were entitled to $0. So he got us a week's pay. So I got that email, and it's pretty cool. So I'm typing up an email. Say thank you, because that's what you're taught. Someone does you right, you say thank you. And I almost didn't send it. And I finally said, no, it's right. So I sent it. Next thing, my boss, Robert's like, Gary, what's going on? What are you talking about? Sid's coming up to talk to you. What did you do this time? Because, I was kind of outspoken, and, I had 1 or 2 chats with the boss. And Sid was an imposing man. He was like 6'5". He had gone through West Point. He was, Mr. Youngberg, stand up. What? And I stood up, and I'm like, oh, and Robert's just, you can tell he's just, and Sid reached out, grabbed my hand, about ripped my arm off, shaking my hand. He goes, you are the only person in this entire company that sent a thank you
No kidding.
email out of 523 people.
Wow.
And I was like, what? No. And then I tried to downplay. I was like, well, Sid, I was kind of worried I'd be thought a brown nose or whatever. He said, it doesn't matter what you thought, you did it. He says, you don't know.
And it was the right thing to do.
And he says, you don't know what we had to go through just to get you guys that. Thank you for sending that email.
Nice.
So, whether it's $100 or whether it's a week's pay, it doesn't matter.
Be nice to your boss.
They did something for you.
Remember that, kids. Oh.
So anyway, so then about 5 years of that, I was done.
Yeah.
And you probably know him from Simplex, Keith.
Actually, I don't.
Okay,
I was there for like a 4-year stint, and then I worked adjacently with him at OHSU, but mostly just like a couple of techs.
So he'd moved on to Landis & Gear at the time, and asked me if I'd come over to work there, and I thought, yeah, that'd be cool, and I was, I'd got remarried by then, and it just, I was done sitting. And I could see it was kind of like the training manager job. I could see it was a dead end.
Yeah.
Because what's the first budget most companies cut when things get tight? Training. What's the budget they're going to do? They're either going to send the calls overseas to a call center. They don't want people, we all had to be NICET certified. I had the most field experience. If you took all the other 3 techs together, added up their field experience, I had them hands down because, I'd been in the field. That's how I landed the job, because I'd been in the field. But then it just got 14,000 calls a year. Got tough.
That's a lot.
It's just,
that's,
and then you had to do other things in between the calls, which, you know how that works. So I took the job at Landis and Gear, Landis and Staffa, and Keith, ironically, about 4 weeks later or whatever, he went back to Central ESL.
Really?
Tech support. Yeah. I think for his family, it wasn't working because, our industry, you worked at PSI where you work now, you go home when it's fixed.
Yeah.
If you're conscientious.
Yeah.
Unless you happen to land a job, you can go home after 8 hours. But, But
if it's not fixed, you don't go home.
Well, here's the thing. It's like I tell the kids and the guys, and it gets repeated now. Getting up early in fire alarm just guarantees you a long day.
Mm-hmm. You're right.
Out at that big plant,
you're right.
I'd start at 3:30, and sometimes I didn't go home till 10:30 the next morning. No, I don't do early. Get somebody else to do it. I'll work all night, but I'm not going in early if I can help
I get it.
So
Landis Gear, because I always saw it as Landis Gear, Landis Gear Powers, Landis Gear Powers.
It was. They had
all these names. They kept
for crying out loud.
There.
And then even after Siemens bought them, it was Siemens Industry and City, Siemens this, Siemens. It's like just pick a name and stay with it. Why keep changing the name? But it's a corporate thing.
Is that how you got into Edwards? Then was through.
That's how I got into Edwards.
Because I saw there's still down in OSU. There's still EST3 panels that are labeled Landis and Gear or Landis Power.
Yeah, so that part would be something like a SIGA-PS-LG, Landis and Gear. And even when it said Siemens on the badge of the smoke detector, the part number was still SIGA-PS-LG. Of course, now that's all gone because the SIGAs are being replaced with the new ones. But that's how I got an EST. And they sent me to school 6 times in short order. I went to Florida like 6 times in 1 year.
Yeah.
And it just rang for me that some people hate the way that thing programs, but it makes sense to me.
Right.
It just something.
But you had already programmed. Had you programmed in C++, or were you familiar?
I didn't even. What is C++? Is that like a B-?
So it was a brand new programming system to you.
It was to me.
But if you were capable of working in Octal.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, then
hexadecimal, octal.
Right, but you knew the guts of how the machine language was working, because in the Navy we had a system called NTDS, Naval Tactical Data System, and if you were on a good modern ship, it had all kinds of wackadoodle things. If you were not on a modern ship, like one of the ships I was on, I had to enter everything in octal, and it was a long string. Yeah. So like and it wasn't like on a regular keyboard. It was on a keyboard that you could move fast. It had big Lexan fat buttons. Oh. And the numbers, I can't even describe. If anybody saw it, they'd go,
"What's that?
What is that?" And I had to memorize these strings. Yeah. And so I sat between the 2 operators, and as a supervisor, it was my job to put this stupid thing in this machine. And then I had a guy in combat who would see that pop up on his screen, and then he can manipulate the data much more efficiently. So I got it in, and then he had the more modern systems to be able to control it. I never even saw how he did what he did.
Because you were busy punching all the buttons.
I was too busy learning how to, as quick as I can, type. Oh, it's terrible. It's a terrible job. I'm like, let me do anything but this. But whatever. Anyway, So then you started learning the EST3 system, and I'm not familiar with it other than obviously managing people who'd worked on it, and I'm obviously familiar with some of its skills, some of its capabilities. But it's a pretty open, open architecture system. Yeah, I mean, you open up the box, it doesn't know if it's a toaster oven or a fire panel until you tell it what it is.
That was a new thing because when I was at ADT, everything came down from corporate. It was pre. It fit their box. Yeah. Everything you did at AT fit their box, and you had all the rules and stuff. Well, EST had their rules. Of course, you go to the certification schools, but literally, you start up a brand new EST panel, it won't do diddly but look at you.
Yeah,
It'll
it
just
doesn't know
look at you.
anything.
And if it was a new thing that if I don't tell that LED to turn on a certain way, it won't. It's like a smooth brain baby. You've got to teach it everything.
I tell people today that if you're working for a company that puts you to 3 school and you can learn how to program a 3 and you become good at it, there is no PLC on this planet that you're not going to be able to run. There's just not. Because even in the simplex world, if you start up an ES, it's got basic architecture built into it, but you just like any other system, you got to tell it how to do what it's going to do. But it does know, certain aspects.
Well, ironically, when I worked for Siemens for almost 23 years on and off, up until the last 3 years, I never touched the Siemens panel.
Really?
Because they said...
Oh, no, because all you did was EST.
Yeah, I did EST at the airport and Intel, and I helped at Nike. Another guy did most of Nike, but I helped there. And, when I went to the other panel, and it was this drag and drop stuff and old school computer batch files, but basically scripts, if you will, and you drag this thing in, and it wouldn't work. I'd call tech support one. Oh, well, here we have to, and they'd lift the curtain, pull the curtain back, see what the little man's doing behind the curtain, and I'd tell them, no, I need that because you're giving me a product that's not working. I can't troubleshoot, it's not working. Oh, no, you don't get to see that.
Right.
Whereas EST, if you program it wrong, it's going to work wrong. If you program it right, it works right. And you get to see everything. And it's rare that the compiler ever lies to you. It has once in a great while when they've had a glitch, but, it worked. It just worked. And their rules report, you could do that. The toughest challenge I've done is voice, because there's some things you just have to know it's going to do it, but I found a way to write it down and build like a little block diagram for myself. Because again, if you don't tell the amplifier what channel to turn on, what message to play, or you accidentally tell it to play 2 messages, the ASU, which is audio source unit, just kind of flies its fingers at you and does nothing. Or you get the default tone. And when you do a big place like, say, the airport, you do not want the wrong tones ever coming out on those speakers, ever.
And it is telling that the Edwards product line, is at the airport and at Intel and at Nike and all those places.
Denver, DIA, it's there.
Right, Denver International. So it's like
a lot of the big places.
A lot of the big places have, even the Pentagon has it. And I'm not being brand specific here. I just happen to know that.
Like Chicago, Siemens got Chicago. O'Hare has a Siemens panel, and Boston has, what's that other brand? I think Boston has Simplex
Simplex is a pretty,
they're a big player
big player too. Yeah. But they're like, now that I'm neck deep back in Simplex, the way that they network things and the way that the way that we tie things together is not nearly as complicated as a 3, but it also limits you on certain aspects. Where when I would work with Bryce at PSI, and he'd say, I'd say, well, I want this to do that. And he'd go, oh, okay, well then, you could see him working out how the rules, and then I'd look at him write the rules. And I'm like, woof. I mean, you have to know the language that this thing is in. And and with us, it was just a matter of putting a device in a list or a custom control program, and that's it.
Oh, kind of like correlations or something.
It's super simple. It's like like the way that they make it. Especially the newer program. The older one's not quite as intuitive. The newer programs are really quite intuitive. And like today I was working on one where, it seems simple, but I'm going to take this node that's here and I'm going to run points in this other node, and then this other node's just going to carry the points. It doesn't know. It's not going to really control them. It's going to control them for this node, and that all that interconnectivity that you can do now with these fire panels is really, really cool. But when you look at something where you're doing, voice and risers and stuff like that, and we have addressable NAC systems, which is Simplex is one of the only companies that put out addressable NAC systems, and that is its own monster. And I take my hat off to the guys who are programming that. I work with a guy named Ralph from Simplex who is just like, I mean, I watch him go through it, and what he just like you. He's like you, only in the Simplex world, and it's like I get the sense that, this guy's forgotten more about what it takes to make these things work than I'll ever get, Yeah. So I try to kind of glean what I can. And
well, and kind of back to the evolution, when they first dropped me at the site, and I had to sign the NDA at Intel, so I can only talk about certain things. But
that little tiny chip manufacturer,
the little
itty bitty baby one out there.
But it won't be anything that violates that. But basically, when I first started out there, we had 17 panels on one of their systems, and you had to carry the computer to each one of the panels to do there was no downline downloading like now.
Right.
Yeah, it was Rev 1.1. We're on Rev 5.4.2 now, I believe. Yeah. So I've watched this thing morph. And that one system that used to only have 17 panels has roughly 49 or 50 on it. Yeah. When they sent me to the airport, it had 22. Now we're up to 56.
Both of those systems are massive.
They're massive.
They're just massive. And they do an enormous amount of work. And there's a lot of lifting, a lot of heavy lifting that people don't realize that's happening behind the scenes.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, smoke control and things like that. Besides audio and the standard fire alarm stuff, there's also
there's life safety. We're shutting down air handlers. We're making sure that doors are supposed to close, ones are supposed to open, and all that's by those rules.
Right.
And we actually, me and two other guys at the other company, came up with a labeling scheme for the EST system. Because what I found ironic is I go to the class, the first thing they say, we don't use addresses, we use labels. Well, all the A&Es use addresses, so what are you thinking? And then
what's an A&E?
Architects and engineers, specifiers for that actually design the systems before we get there, for plans and specs, not design build, disaster build.
Disaster.
I'm sorry. Anyway, so I go to this class.
That's going to be on a T-shirt.
I know, right?
I do disaster builds.
Yeah. So EST says to me at the class, every label's got to be unique. And so first thing I do, being me, I go, well, it's easy. You got a hard-coded address. Why don't you use that? Oh, we don't use addresses. So first thing I did when I got back is, the heck with them.
Right.
Because, they would tell us to label something like office smoke detector 1. Well, you have 42 characters to deal with. So now you've burned up office smoke detector 1, or even SMK 1, that's 4 characters. And I'm thinking most hard-coded addresses at maximum were 6 digits. I'm trying to save space in my program so that I can call out things specifically. And most of the time, we don't use address, but sometimes you do, like when you're going to drop a deluge system. You don't want anything else in that entire system of up to 65,000 points to drop that deluge except the 1 or 2 things you want it to do.
So that's got to be
So
unique.
you call out that whole label, that whole structure, so that this and that happen, drop the deluge. No accidental, a smoke over here.
So for the listeners who don't, if you've worked on an analog addressable system, and I'll pick on Simplex, you set the addressing and it matches what's in the database. And if you have a bad detector, then you change out the head. And if the base carries the addressing, where some companies have the addressing in the head.
The head carries
but
it. But
in EST, the address comes out of the factory. It's like a MAC address. It isn't a MAC address, but it's like a MAC address.
Serial number.
So it's a serial number that's unique to that device, and it will always have that serial number. And so if I go to change out, so if a smoke detector in this room goes bad and on an EST3, if I pop it out and put a new one in,
automatically addresses.
It rewrites that address into the program, and
you don't have to do anything.
You don't have to do anything
unless you take 2 down at the same time.
Then you're
stepping on yourself.
Then you're stepping on. Yeah. Then you've got some trouble. So every manufacturer, and if I look at the way that Gamewell does theirs, or Honeywell does theirs with the maybe
the rotary switch
and decimals up to 3 digits of decimals, and then Simplex does theirs binary, but the least significant bit's on the left and not on the right. And and then I burn these in, and with Siemens I burn them in like I did with the double EEPROM burner, and same thing with Hochiki heads on Silent Night equipment. Everybody's got their own little unique identifier, and I worked on a Fike system that had the Eclipse protocol, which was a system sensor put this thing out, where the actual heads carried the programming themselves at what they were going to do. And it was point to point. It was peer-to-peer networking. So you would program this head, and if you needed this door to open or close, it had the knowledge. The fire panel was just another peripheral on the line. It didn't know what it was doing. Yeah, it was great if you installed it and you knew what you were doing. But if the program didn't need to reside in the fire panel, it resided in everything's head out there. So when one went bad and you didn't have a copy of the program, then here you are scratching your head going, well, I don't understand.
What the devil
am I doing here? Yeah. So, every manufacturer kind of has their little unique sort of and Edwards has happened to have. Yeah. I've told people this is that, you and Morris are the two top integrators in the country that I'm aware of. And if you guys don't know that literally there's two people in the Edwards world that aren't working for the headquarters that really know what you guys know. And that's because you've integrated some of these larger systems.
Yeah. And Morris was my go-to guy. I don't know what I'm going to do when he retires in 800 days, but I guess.
No, but he lives in like Missouri, right?
Yeah.
East of the Mississippi?
Lenexa, Kansas, I think. He lives by my dad. Okay. My dad lives in Burlingame, Kansas.
Because I tell everybody that east of the Mississippi it's Morris, and west of the Mississippi it's you.
Yeah.
But I don't know if he actually lives east of the Mississippi or not.
Yeah, but no, he does. He's, very smart individual. I mean, and he took to it too. It just, because I didn't follow him because he's at DST, but he and I worked together at Siemens. I've known the man 30 years.
Yeah.
And, he's just a wonderful human being, very sharp, always been there.
I've never actually talked to him, but I've heard his voice on the phone.
Yeah.
Before I'm like, that's what Morris sounds like.
Yeah, he's a big man.
I thought he'd be like a cat, but that's
he's actually a big man.
Is he?
Yeah, he's getting littler, but he's like 6'4" or 5.
Well, I don't want him to come out here and beat me up.
No, he wouldn't. He's a gentle giant. Just sharp. But yeah, so the programming, I just took to it. And the voice and the other things, and then I said, me and the two other guys, we came up with a set of standards to do the labeling. And once we did that, oh man, programming got so much easier. And I brought that to just about everywhere I've worked. I did the VA hospital up on the hill. Mm-hmm. Converted that when I worked for another company. And I went in there and they had coders. Remember coders?
Mm-mm.
Okay. Tell this story. Sean loves this one. When I was in grade school, Edgemont Elementary in Salt Lake City, Utah, our fire alarm system consisted of, it looked just like a jump rope hanging down from the ceiling, and you had a blackboard at each station, and it would have the hash marks of how many times you're supposed to pull the cord like Morse code. Ring, 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 ring.
Really?
Pause. And they taught you how to do that when I was in grade school.
Oh, so that's what you coded to tell the central state or the
No, it was just local. It was just local. So it'd ring the bells that many times. Yeah.
So this door was ... Okay. Yeah. Now I know what you mean by coders.
The school was built like an X. The center was the cafeteria and the gym, and then you had wings.
I didn't know you had to manually pull the string.
You had to manually pull it. Now the principal had what we called the egg beater. He could punch in the number and it automatically sent it out, and it was again like a little probably code wheel inside the thing. But that's literally what we did. So coders are, you take either a single stroke bell or chime, in this case it was chime, and they literally would have a code wheel. So like the VA, different floors had different codes. Like in like if a second floor, they all started with 2 because it's second floor. Third floor on up, and mezzanine, they make a exception for that and figure that one out. So I went in there and I had to program a coder in an EST3. That's weird. Only time I've ever done it. But I talked to the electric shop and the people that were there, and I said, well, here's the thing. I said, here's what my program looks like, and what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to give you this spreadsheet. It has 42 little boxes, characters. You fill in what you want me to call these areas.
Oh, nice.
That's the message. I said, this part's programming land. You don't have any say-so over here. That's what I use to make your system do what you want to do. But here's your 42 characters. And they loved it, because nobody had ever talked to them like that before.
Nice.
And so they had things like B1 and 1-1. They had all these secret codes, meant nothing to me.
But everything to them.
Everything to them. Yeah. And because I did that, at that time, we got another $15,000 project to have me rewrite the other buildings.
Oh, no kidding.
To that code.
Nice.
So I just got in there and I changed all the messages, and they went back during their annuals and they reconfigured it.
So that's so you see, when you bring something to the table that is a good idea, that is useful, right? People pick up on that.
They pick up on that. And so, I don't remember what the company did for me. Probably not much, because I don't work there anymore. But, but still, that's just how I approach my job. I own it. And So I'd left Siemens after a bit and went to this other company, did that, and then I went back to Siemens. So I kind of was on a revolving door plan at Siemens. I ended up at the airport because I was going to go out there and help with the program for about 6 weeks. And, 2 years later, I was out. They took a kid fresh out of school with zero experience. That was the mentality back then. And they had him program the airport with what they told you.
And it seems like that's a...
Yeah, and it's like, no, you can't use the labels. The message equals label. They used to teach you that at Edwards. They don't anymore. They don't, message does not equal label. And
a lot of our listeners probably don't know what that means in the scheme of things. But if you're an EST guy, you'll know exactly what that means.
Right.
But if you're a simplex monkey like me, you're like going, wait?
Yeah, so you have the label is the part the program recognizes. The message is the part that the customer sees.
Yeah, so the message is what pops up on the screen and says,
the label is what allows the machine to do the work and drop the doors. So when you call out a label, like one of the things we did is we always said, give a building identifier, device type, and then your hard-coded address, and put suffixes. And we made up, and I have that list. I think I even sent it to you when I came to work. And, like AHU is air handler unit. And the thing neat about EST programming, they have this thing called numerical sequence and some other qualifiers. And you can literally, if you use the end qualifier, you can use, like you can say AHU1, and then on the output relay, you call it AHU1. And then you put this N in the string for the rule, and it matches them.
Right.
And you can do that from 1 to 32,250.
So it's easy to write
the rule,
like bypasses and rules and stuff.
Yeah.
Because I know that the wildcards, because in programming language, you can use these wildcards, the asterisks, and it'll pick up everything past.
Right. But they're not your friend.
But they can be your frenemy if you don't do them
exactly.
Right. Which blew us away because in most systems, if I put a bypass on, like in a simplex system, it usually goes to a list, and we have a list of devices, and whatever you put in that list
is going to be bypassed.
Is what can be bypassed, no matter what.
Yeah.
And then, but in Edwards, it can be all based on a qualifier or a wildcard, and if it's not written right, like if you make one mistake in your syntax, then everything's bypassed except this one little tiny mistake that still works great, except it won't bypass now, and then you hit that point and boom.
Boom, exactly.
It goes off. So that's where I say that if you can learn how to code, because everything, what I'm trying to teach my students is that everything is based on PLCs. No matter what you do in this industry, you're going to be programming and working on a PLC. And there's no way around it. And so it doesn't.
It's all computer now.
It's all computer now. There's no way to get away from it.
Yeah, we saw that coming. A couple of us older, well, I wasn't older then, I was in my 40s, but we embraced it because we knew, like when I started, you had 4 wires. You had your plus and minus, your ground and your shunt on a McCullough, you're done. You had 4 wires.
Simple.
I mean, all the wires when I started were black, 16 gauge TW installation, which nicked real easy. But back to the programming thing, that numerical sequencer helps not do what the wildcard does.
Oh.
Because it's like if you have 10 air handlers, you just write it for 10.
Okay.
If you have 100. And then unlike what Edwards would teach in the old schools was less is better, sometimes more is better. Because remember, NFPA says if you start messing with the program and you're touching things and you have one of them great big sequencers that's 100 long, and you mess with that, now you might be messing with 100 air handlers, and that can be bad.
And that can be really bad.
Very expensive.
Yeah.
So there's that balance. Everything's a balance.
Yeah.
And so that's how I got dropped into some of those things. And
so when did you get your NICET 4, and when?
There's a story on that too. Yeah, I when I worked for Robert at ESL, he was pushing everybody NICET. So he sent me to a NICET prep class because back then you had to do it on pen and paper with the elements. And if you did not set up your test right, you wouldn't pass.
Yeah, I remember that because I had to sign up for extra elements that I didn't need so I had time to get the elements I did.
And so, but to get a NICET 2, you had to sign up. I mean, you had so many core elements, there were no extras. So this guy figured out a way, and he taught this class, so you set your elements up right. And so I took the class, I set my elements up, and ironically, because I'd worked at ADT and the test was based on McCullough circuits.
Oh.
I'm what one of 15%. I passed it the first go.
You passed NICET for the first time?
NICET 2.
NICET 2.
And that, there's an 85% fallout rate on that.
Yeah, because I didn't.
Because the lady called me and says, "Oh my God, you're 15 out of 100."
That's incredible.
I passed 33 of 34 elements, and I aced 13 of them.
Whoa.
So what happened was I took the test.
That's really good, Gary.
I went in, and before the lunch break, I had all the questions but about 25 answered.
Nice.
Took lunch. Of course, my brain was mush. Came back, answered the 25. Then I went through all the ones that I wasn't sure.
Mm-hmm.
And then
that's your strategy for taking the test at the
right,
time,
and they taught me that. I hadn't been to college or anything. I'm just School of Hard Knocks, cum laude, But then that was the decline because I was one of the most level 2s with the most past credits and was not a 3 or a 4. It was a decline because the one that busted my chops was 35002 shop and riser diagrams. Elements had nothing to do with either. It had to do with AIA stuff. I remember I worked for
AIA?
American Institute of Architects. Architects? Yeah, sorry.
Once again, we're going back to
yeah, we do the TLA stuff, the
stuff,
3-letter acronyms.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Good.
Right.
Thanks for catching me. So I couldn't pass that for love or money. Could not pass that element. 35002. I had every other element. I had
you need that one to pass.
I need that one to be a 3 and a 4. And I basically said, to heck with it, don't care. I'll be the highest decorated 2, probably affected my paycheck all those years. And I didn't get my 4. And then I went to work for Convergent, and my boss, Mario, awesome guy, encouraged me to, quit with the attitude and just do it. So I
love Mario.
Yeah.
So, he was so good.
So I did, and I eventually passed my 4. I passed 35002, barely passing. I mean, barely. But I got a pass, got my 4.
Nice.
And then I hated that so much when NICET put out the call for test writers, I volunteered.
Oh, okay. Oh, I forgot to ask you that because you sit on a couple code committees too.
Yeah, I sit on 101 Technical Committee Detention Centers. I know, right? Never been to one except for work. And I went back to NICET 5 times when they went to computer-based testing.
Nice.
And, you hear the grumbling about how much NICET test costs. I know why. They fly 15 SMEs back there to write these tests. I mean,
subject matter experts.
Thank you. Gosh,
you should be in the military and use acronyms because I could, when I was in the Navy, I could spit out acronyms like
my son does it. He's in the Air Force.
No one knew what I was talking about. I'm like, ooh,
I'm glad you're keeping me honest. So anyway, so I was back there 5 different times writing tests. It was a heck of an experience. Yeah. Heck of an experience.
So so you sit on codes, you sit on code committees, and you teach for us. And for those of you who don't know, Gary teaches fire alarm along with Michael Baker and me sometimes. I've super happy to have you teaching.
Thank you.
And me like backing out and just doing, because I'm just going to do basic trades and specialized controls until unless I'm needed to go in and do a fire class. But,
I think I signed up to do codes too, but I didn't want to take with my circumstances. I didn't want to do 2 classes yet. Maybe next term.
Yeah, maybe next term. But I would love to get Baker here on the other side of the table because he brings. He's just like you. He's just like Sean. Yeah. I'm not intentionally grabbing everybody from PSI, but since I worked there for 5 years and know all these, we hired all these powerhouses that I want to get you guys recorded before
I appreciate it.
Things go on. Well, I really appreciate you coming in tonight.
I appreciate you asking me. That's
excellent.
It seems like I just told stories, but my class, one of the kids told me, keep telling your stories, old guy.
It's a critical part. The way that you interface with people is unique, and it's in all my years of teaching, I want the student to be comfortable with what I'm telling them. And I want them to want to learn what I have to tell because my stories are interesting and because I have seen, like you, I've seen 1,000 things, and I've been in process places. I've been in.
I was almost electrocuted on the job once. Literally.
Well played, really. Yeah. Tell us that, and then we'll close out on that.
Okay. So I was working on a new machine. I can't say where, but it was a hurry up, get her done.
Mind your own business as you do.
Right, and there was a motor starter.
Oh,
shut down.
Oh, serious voltage. Yeah.
So it was 480.
Yeah.
And we'd done a workaround, and everybody signed off on it. Me, the general, Mario, everybody, the client, can't say who. And all of a sudden, this 3-wire electrician, what's this stupid half-watt doesn't know he's doing? He took the interposing relay out and wired the 480 contactor direct to the signature module.
Yikes.
So I had to watch all these.
So a signature module, for those of you guys who don't know, is a little tiny relay. And I mean, this thing's like 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches by 3/4 of an inch thick.
And it'll
it's
carry
tiny.
a 0.5 amp, 24 volts. That's all it'll carry.
That's all it'll carry.
Or no, 2 at 24 and a 0.5 amp at 120, resistive.
Right.
So I'm in there, and I used to wear a wedding ring because my wife liked it. It was sized extra big, so I could take it off, put it in my pocket, because I didn't always work in panels. So we're testing it, chunk, 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 everything's great. One last test at this client. Had to test it till it breaks. Okay, fine. So we had to watch all these safety videos, and I take the cover off the 8x8. I see my wedding ring on my hand. This will be quick. And then I remember that joker, Charlie, in the video going, I've done this 1,000,000 times. Okay, I'm taking the ring off. I took the ring off, put it in my pocket, grabbed that wire, and it had a hair on it. It was a 12 gauge, stranded. And that hair drug across the back of my hand. And I'm like, holy...
So that's one single phase of 480.
Which is what, 277 to ground or whatever. But it went from my elbow to the back of my hand. And then I'm like, I've got a tiger by the tail. What in the devil am I going to do? And this module's a 1/4 inch off the back plane of that can, which is ground. And a 12 gauge wire barely fits in those terminals. It's listed for it, but I mean, if every hair is not right, and I'm like, So I finally got it back in. I said, hey, we got to stop the job. We got to get an inside wireman, get this off. You're going to blow up a $40,000 panel. And my client's like, dude, you could have been fried. And then, as we would say, the fecal matter hit the oscillator.
I'm glad you're okay.
But yeah, I called the wife, told her I loved her, said kids, I almost widowed you.
This is why we take our wedding rings off when we're working.
Or wear those rubber ones.
All right. Well, thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Half-Watt Podcast. We always want to hear from you, and we encourage you to email us at halfwattpod@gmail.com with questions or even your own stories. Funny, crazy, or praiseworthy, we want to hear it all. You can follow us on Instagram at halfwattpod to stay up to date on our feed. And be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And share us with a friend, the best way to help us grow. The Half-Watt Podcast is a production of Now Hear This Studios.